Find the second derivative y double prime or d squared y dx squared for the function y equals f of g of x, then evaluate y double prime of 7, where we have all that information. So y here is a composition of functions, neither of which is known. We have f of g of x. And therefore, our first derivative, y prime or dy dx, we'll start with the derivative of the outermost function, that's the f. Leave the inside function alone, g of x, but then multiply by the derivative of the inside function to complete the chain rule. Our second derivative, y double prime, or d squared y dx squared, will be the derivative of the first derivative, the derivative of this. Well, that's a product of functions. We have the f prime of g of x times the g prime of x. We'll therefore make use of the product rule. So we will have the derivative of the first, so that will be f double prime, leave its inside alone, but then times the derivative of the inside to complete the chain rule, times the second left alone, plus the first left alone, times the derivative of the second, the derivative of g prime, we will call g double prime. So our second derivative, y double prime, or d squared y dx squared, will be f double prime of g of x times g prime of x times g prime of x, we can call g prime of x squared, plus f prime of g of x times g double prime of x. The next thing to do is to evaluate y double prime of 7. So y double prime of 7 means to plug a 7 in for each of the x's. F double prime of g of 7 times g prime of 7 squared plus f prime of g of 7 times g double prime of 7. And we have all this information over there, and obviously we have some extraneous information. We have to make sure we use the correct ones from over there. So the first thing I need to do is evaluate the g of 7, so I know what's inside of f double prime. Well, g of 7 is right here. G of 7 is a 0, so this is going to be a 0 inside here, so it's f double prime of 0. I also need a g prime of 7, that will be here, and we will have that squared, so it'll be times a -1 squared, plus, and then I have an f prime of g of 7. G of 7 again is here, it's a 0, so I have f prime of 0. And then I need a g double prime of 7, and g double prime of 7 is right here, that's a 4. So now I need to find f double prime of 0. F double prime of 0 is right here, it's a -6, times a -1 squared, -1 times -1 is a +1, plus an f prime of 0, f prime of 0 is right here, which is a 3, times the 4. -6 times a 1 is a -6, plus 3 times 4 is a 12, and a -6 plus a 12 will be a +6.